Welcome to the Comic Sauce Podcast, where we talk comics and comics culture. I am Henry Liu, and today I'm joined by Christian Diadamo. Christian, how's it going?
Hey, it's going well.
Awesome. I'm also joined by Porfirio Rangel. Porfirio, how goes?
It's going well, Henry. Happy to be here chatting with you guys.
Awesome, awesome. So today is Thursday, May 16th, and just yesterday, we saw the season finale of season 1 of X-Men 97. So we're going to talk all about X-Men 97 today.
Woo, woo, woo.
Yes. All right. So let's get right into it. We normally talk a little bit expectations, so why don't we just go over that real quick? Um, don't want to go too deep into it, but I know we attended some X-Men panels prior to this show. I mean, we talked about going to WonderCon this past WonderCon and going to an awesome X-Men fandom panel while the show was happening, right? There was a few episodes in, but even before X-Men 97 even started, we went to last year's WonderCon X-Men fandom panel. And I also went to the San Diego Comic-Con X-Men fandom panel last year as well. So maybe we can just cover that real quick. I know that definitely helped me kind of get hyped for the show because I didn't grow up with the original animated series, and I'm not the world's biggest X-Men fan. But going to those X-Men fandom panels really was cool. I thought they were really great. And yeah, I certainly got pretty hyped to see this show after going to those panels. How about you guys? Porfirio, you in particular, you met the creators of the original animated series at WonderCon last year, right? Or was it the year
Yes.
before? Last year?
No, it was last year.
Okay. So
Wait,
tell us a little bit about
you're
the
right. It was 2 years ago. It
was it two
was
years ago?
2 years.
So there's another one. Yeah, we went to last year's, and yeah, I didn't you and I go to the 2022 WonderCon X-Men Phantom panel also?
I think we did,
I
yeah.
think we did.
But it
Yeah,
wasn't. I don't think it was called an X-Men fandom panel. I think it was just like X-Men animated series with the OG writers.
right on.
Who were what are their names? Eric and his wife Julia.
Oh, cool. That's great.
Yeah, I don't think it was yeah, I don't think it was the X-Men fandom panel that we went to. I think it was just like them like talking about like working on the OG series, and I believe at that time, because it was 2 years ago, they could not spill any of the beans on
Yeah.
the 97 show.
Right. Right, right.
They couldn't even play the theme.
I remember that. Yeah, they couldn't even play the theme song, but it didn't really matter because everyone knew it. Right? Yeah.
Uh,
But that's cool. Yeah. So yeah, when this show finally came out, I think we were like properly prepped, properly psyched, you know. So that was helpful. Uh, any thoughts on going into the show, Christian? Like, what were your how are you feeling about the show before you started watching it?
let's see. A lot of I guess I wasn't really sure what to expect. I never really watched X-Men much growing up. Um I think I kind of mostly missed it growing up. I was born in the early 90s. So,
I watched a lot of Batman the Animated Series, but that was already that's when it came to Cartoon Network on syndication, and it was a much easier show to syndicate because it was like Villain of the Week, one-off type stories, whereas X-Men, I only watched a handful of episodes because I'd always be in the middle of an arc. X-Men did a lot of multi-episode arcs, and and it was great if you watch week by week, but of course, I kinda missed that. So, I never really saw it much on TV outside of, like, a episode here or there that I'd kinda catch it on odd time. So, I was not really as big of an X-Men fan growing up. I think it wasn't until the movies, and, of course, I actually really like the arcade game. The arcade game is really great, the beat 'em up. So, I was going into this, pretty fresh. Now, I do see X-Men's kinda place in animation. X-Men, uh, is kinda part of like, a larger, like, animation revolution in the early '90s, where I think there was a lot of big quality boosts, as well as a lot of, like, changing. The idea of that animation could be for a wider audience outside of small children, really changed with, well, X-Men, Batman, the animated series, and, of course, The Simpsons. Not to mention the Disney Revolution was going around at the time, and Nickelodeon, uh, started airing, animated content. So X-Men is kind of I think, like, kind of a cornerstone in its own way of just, animation in general, especially in the United States. So, while I will not a big fan of it, going in, the original show, I s I know what I was getting into in a way. So and as well as going to the panels and, like, just seeing the hype around this show, it's hard not to get wrapped up in that myself. So,
Yeah,
a lot of excitement, but also not really sure what I was expecting.
right on. Good
Yeah.
call outs, good call outs. One thing I would add too is, when the Fox acquisition happened, there was a lot of media hype, etc. Um, and I remember at the time, in my mind, Disney getting the rights to X-Men was like the biggest piece of that puzzle. Like Disney was getting a lot from the Fox acquisition, but in my mind, the top property was X-Men. And what you mentioned, Christian, does reflect that. Like you weren't even a big X-Men fan, but you were like you were still exposed to it. You got into the X-Men via video games. You're aware of the animated series. You're aware of like the impact of that series. And it's just a huge franchise, right? Comics, video games, movies, animated series, you name it. And Marvel fans have been waiting a long time to, sink our teeth into the X-Men. And, we've gotten teasers like Multiverse of Madness, etc. But there really hasn't been much of anything X-Men from Disney until now, right? So that was part of the excitement for me too. Like, okay, finally, we're getting the X-Men content that has been teased, that has been hyped for so long. So there was definitely a part of me that was thinking, okay, let's do this. Let's see how Disney does here, and a lot of curiosity, and yeah, definitely a lot of excitement.
Yeah,
Okay.
for me, like the X-Men OG series in the 90s, that show holds a very, very special place in my heart. I think even before, I mean, this was during the same time as like the Spider-Man animated series. Um, but I feel like I became an X-Men fan before Spider-Man, but will like probably 100% say like X-Men got me into like Marvel and geek culture and everything. You know, I feel like the OG series was the my gateway into the geeky person I am today. I mean, you know, like Christian, like how can you not like tune into that TV show, you know, with the Awesome Thing song, you know, the da-na-na-na-na, da-na-na-na-na, you know,
Yes.
and just the cool colors and like the characters, you know, I feel like during the time like you didn't really see that, you know, like yes, you had the Batman animated series and the Spider-Man animated series, but you didn't have like a group of like these like misfit heroes, you know, like Avengers didn't even exists on a TV show at the time, you know. So this was, I think, like a cool like geeky moment if you're like a little kid and you don't have that much exposure to TV comic stuff, you know. And uh yeah, so that show it's one of my favorites and it has a really, really special place in my heart. So when I heard that they were gonna revive this, like I was like, oh my gosh, like you guys got some like big shoes to fill, you know? Like this is you know, it's like being told like, oh, I don't know, like, oh, we're gonna revive SpongeBob or The Simpsons. It's like, how do you revive something like that and hold it to the like latitude and popularity that like folks associate it with, you know? And I will admit, I'll be the first to admit, I was very skeptical and being like, I don't know how I feel about this. And even like when they dropped the first trailer, I was like, okay, I'm I have lukewarm feelings, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But then watching that trailer, once they again the song when they
Yeah.
reintroduced the song and like Cyclops is like to me my X-Men, then I was like, okay, I'm all game. Like give it to me, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, like it was yeah, I felt like a kid again, like a 90s kid, like just sitting there at the edge of my seat with no care in the world. I felt like a little kid, and this uh that trailer brought back a lot of that inner child out of me.
Right on. Great call. Yeah, thinking back a bit, it's really cool that you were a big fan of the animated series. Like with Christian and I, not so much, right? So, but you were there, and that's so cool that the original series was your gateway to geek fandom, right?
Hmm.
Because I think that is the case for a lot of folks. You know, you look throughout history and definitely on the old school side, actual comic books were um, were the gateway, and that was the case for me. And more recently, the newer generations, the movies really have been the gateway, particularly movies of the MCU. But when we're talking like 90s, it was animation, man. It was the X-Men animated series. It was the Batman animated series. It was the Spider-Man animated series, right? So for that whole period of time, that's how people were exposed to superhero content, right? So all of that is having this moment right now because of this series, right? Or in large part to this series at least, right? So I think it's super cool. And I think it's really cool that you were part of that, Porfirio.
Yeah.
And yeah, let's get into the show now, yeah? So spoiler alert, definitely spoiler alert, because there was a lot of big time shit that went down with this season.
With there's a lot that we need.
There's a lot, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So spoiler alert, you've been warned. Um, yeah, yeah. Spoiler alert. Just leave it at that. Okay, the show. So yeah, I mean, there's so much to say. Man, I can't remember an animated series just capturing the public's attention like this one, you know? It's just really has caught fire, and it seems like everyone's talking about it, and, um, it's just, it's gotten a lot of hype, which is cool. Um, but yeah, why don't we just start where we normally start off with, what did you like about this series? I know there are a lot of cool things to mention, but any top highlights we wanna call out?
For me, like the first thing I really want to call out is the reintroduction of the of the theme song,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
Like again, like I said, like it was shown in the trailer. Like that's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
But then like, you watch the episode, like I was like I don't know about you guys, but the first episode, like I woke up at like 7 in the morning and like before work and everything, and I turned it on like I was a little kid. And when I saw like the theme song with the like da-na-na-na-na, and then like the exact same graphics used, like right there's the jet plane and Rogue and Storm are flying outside, and then like all the heroes like um having like their individual names being like called out, like I legit had like an emotional reaction. I felt
Mm.
like a little kid. I cried. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so perfect in every way." And just off that, like just off the first like minute or two, I was already sold. Like I was like even right now just thinking back and listening to it, I'm getting like emotional, but it I just felt like a kid again, and I was like, damn, we waited like what, like 30 years for this,
Mhm.
and it's just like a full circle uh adventure.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I don't wanna gloss over the theme song. It seems like a complete no-brainer. Of course, you would have the original theme song and have the opening credits be just like the original series. But, there was a time when superhero content was, like, drastically changed from source material, right? X-Men is not immune to this, right? The first live action X-Men movie from Bryan Singer, they decided to have all the X-Men in black leather suits, right? Which they did make reference to in this show.
What were you
Um,
expecting?
yes,
Yellow spandex?
right. So,
Mhm.
there was a time where there could have been conversations about like, oh, well, we don't want to have that corny old, corny 30-year-old uh synth theme song. Let's create a new one, like a hip hop theme or something, like something stupid like that. Maybe there were some conversations about that, but like this show, it seemed to really care about the fandom and like really asked, okay, what do the fans of the original series want to see? Let's not like disrespect those fans. Let's honor the original series. And, you know, first and foremost is the theme song. Of course, you're going to use the original theme and have it at the very beginning and all these things, right? Um, so, like I oftentimes I'll hit that little skip intro button option for shows. I never did that with this series. Every episode I would watch the full way through. I'd turn up the volume. It's so fucking great, And it's a great way to get hyped for the show, and it's part of the legacy, and I love that. I love that the this show honors the original so much.
I'd judge you pretty hard if anyone push that skip button.
Yeah, right? Christian, any thoughts on highlights of this show?
Let's see. I guess a quick note is that like I think the theme song is like kind of like it's like what are the epitones of like 90s cool, you know?
Yeah,
There is
Mhm,
something so hype about it. And like it's cool the way they update it and the way they'd show like, okay, this episode is gonna have different these characters are gonna be in it. The episodes with Nightcrawler, you had Nightcrawler come in.
mhm.
I don't remember if they did that with the original series. They probably did. And
No.
how they would say the previously on X-Men as
Yeah.
well to kind of started off like the original show. And if you kind of caught um the voice actor, okay, that's Magneto. You kind of knew, all right, maybe Magneto will be very important this episode,
Mhm,
you know. And I thought there were always like nice little touches where they kind of they kind of riff on it a little bit and they'd kind of give you a bit of a tease of the episode. Like, even though I didn't really watch it growing up, it still feels weirdly nostalgic to me to watch it because it just reminds me of like the era, you know.
yeah.
Um
yeah.
and so I think keep it with the audio theme, but kind of just going in a bit of direction. The voice acting I thought was great. It's cool that they brought back a lot of the original cast
Mhm,
for it. With many that we saw at one of the panels. Lenore Zahn reprises Rogue, Cal Dodd is Wolverine, but they also bring in some new voices that I think also do really good. With Magneto, Matthew Watterson, and a really great prolific voice actor that's new to the series is Jennifer Hale, who plays Jean Grey. So I thought the voice acting was pretty top notch throughout the entire show, um, from both returning and newcomers. And it was like that kind of adds to a bit of the nostalgia is hearing the voices you know and love,
mhm.
reprise their old roles.
Yeah,
I go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, like going off what Christian said, like, when hearing uh Lenore's voice as Rogue, like, you know, I learned later in life that she's not Southern, she's far from Southern.
Yeah,
She's Canadian. Um, but just hearing her voice again, like, and then bringing that, like, sugar, kind of phrase, it was again like just feeling like a kid again watching it. Um, but like Christian said, like you have all these like other great talent that just I feel like they pay tribute to the OG voices, like Ray Chase who voices Cyclops and uh AJ who voices Gambit, like they play homage to what came before them and try to uh give fans that like nostalgia taste, but they also make it their own, something that they could claim and it's not like a complete like replica, you know? And it I don't know how to say it, but it's just done such in a good way that doesn't feel like, okay, you guys are trying to like copy and paste. It's more like, okay, now you're like copying and adding some flavor to it, making it your own kind of dish. And I really appreciated that from all the voice actors of the cast from the show.
yeah. I 100% agree. I wrote that down as a big positive also, the voice cast. The voice acting is so awesome in this show. It's great. And it's cool that you get a lot of the original voices and you get some new voices also, and it's all like really great across the board. All right. Any other call outs for highlights?
Yeah, here I got another one. Something that I noticed. Something also really. I think. I'm glad that there wasn't a lot of Wolverine in the season I think with the movies, like Wolverine very much dominates the X-Men. He is this, the iconic standout character of the X-Men,
Hmm.
front and
Mhm.
center, and especially with Hugh Jackman's Wolverine in the movies. Whereas he really wasn't there a lot in X-Men 97. And I think that allowed a lot of other characters to really take center stage, like Cyclops. Oh man, like Cyclops, it's like was so cool in this season. And
Yeah.
he's been very like he was like barely in the movies too.
Hmm.
Rogue also got a lot like a really good arc in this season. I think she was also one of the big standout characters, as well as Storm had a really good arc, and I'm really glad they highlighted um like those characters, while they kind of pushed Wolverine back a bit to just be used in like more of the action sequences, as well as a little bit here and there for that love triangle in episode I think 2 or 3.
Hmm.
So yeah, I thought what they did with the characters was pretty great, overall.
Yeah, kind of going off in similar element. Like I thought the writing with the characters and the story and the action was really good. Like I know like this show was supposed to take place in 97, and but there are just a lot of like relevant themes that existed back then that still exist nowadays, like episode 2, it has that UN meeting with Magneto and all the leaders, all the country leaders, and it's very evident that it's a reference to the January 6th Capitol attack, of all these
Mhm.
like extremists saying like, oh, like they're stealing our country, they don't belong here,
Mhm.
and then here comes fucking like Magneto, and he like kind of gets pushed, because like the reason why I guess like Professor X has Magneto to take his spot instead of Cyclops is to kind of challenge Magneto about like this like uh coexistence between mutants and humans, which I I don't agree with, and that's why Magneto's right. I'm just putting that out there. But it's interesting that like, he is being challenged here and he could easily kill any of these people, and he like brings them up to space. He brings up the person who's supposed to not assassinate but get rid of his powers, and he just says like like you guys fear us, we could easily crush you guys, and but here I am being challenged by Professor Xavier to check my own morals and my own beliefs and for this philosophy of coexistence, and I'm gonna honor that wish. And I think what makes X-Men so successful is that like unlike the Avengers, I think X-Men appeals to that group of like misfits who don't know their place in society, like whether you're like black, Asian, female, gay, like whatever, like if you're like a minority group, like there's always that like misfit label put on you if you're not that typical like cis white male upper middle class like kind of group. And I love that X-Men uh like continues um diving into those kinds of stories, and that's very evident again in like episode 2.
Yeah, well said, Porfirio. Damn, that was a mic drop, dude. Very well said. And I 100% agree. Like, okay, so on one hand, this show is this really great homage to the original series. But let it be known that X-Men 97 is not the original series. It really is something entirely different. It kind of looks like it, but it's a lot cleaner, and they kind of up-leveled with the animation. And they definitely up-leveled in terms of the storytelling, where they went into some territory that was completely unexpected. Like the social commentary vibes of this show is just through the roof. It's like hard-hitting, relevant, timely social commentary that is incredibly powerful. And I was like really amazed by it, and I was very surprised. You know, this episode, the one you mentioned, episode 2, it's called Mutant Liberation Begins. And yes, it mirrors real life. It reflects the January 6th riots, and um that's when, like, I realized that this show is like is something else, you know? And yeah, this is the main thing I want to call out. Like, it's really interesting that they mimicked the original animated series animation style. So it looks like kind of a childish show, you know? That show was for kids. You know, famously, it was like for kids, but it kind of had this undercurrent of, oh, but adults can watch it too, and there's something in there for adults too. Um, But yeah, it was a kids show, and it looked like a kids show, and this new series, X-Men 97, mimics that aesthetic. It looks like it's for kids, so it's almost like a cool juxtaposition where it looks like a kids show, but the content is so adult, it's so edgy, and like it's like important, like social issues are being covered, right? So it reminds me a bit when I was watching the Invincible series, where you get this old school 2D animation look, but then you're hit with this like incredibly ultra violence, uh, ultra violent stuff, right? So the fact that it looked like a kids show made the violence even more like impactful, right? So similarly here, it's the look of it is like a kids show, but then whoa, like the content of it is so adult and so hard hitting. And I think the again the juxtaposition of that makes that all the more powerful.
Mhm. I guess, like, I definitely agree with you guys. I think you guys made some great points. I'd like to I'd like to add that I think the way they coded those messages and the way they've worked those messages into the main plot of the series is really well done. I think that it kinda makes you, hard think about, okay, this is like January 6th, the way the Genosha episode, it's like, "Oh, wow, this feels like I'm watching like a terrorist attack." Like, it makes you recall these very real life events, but it codes them in a way where you're really invested in what's going on with these characters, and it's all about being a mutant and what being a mutant means to the world, the characters, and the situation, that it feels so natural, and you can really just feel the tension in a lot of these scenes. I think episode 2 is a big, as you guys mentioned with the January 6th, the trial of Magneto, as well as the big Genosha attack episode, I think is also one of, I think, the best episodes of this season.
Yep.
And I think that it's like, wow, this is like pretty intense
Hmm.
what they were doing here with that Genosha episode. And I think like it makes the show just that much more gripping, and it feels X-Men, you know?
Hmm.
It's like it does what X-Men does best.
Yeah.
Well
No,
put.
I'm glad you brought up, yeah, the Genosha episode, Christian, because I feel like I have a lot to say about that episode, but are we done with everybody's thoughts? Because I have a lot to say about
Yeah,
that
Yeah,
let,
go
episode.
for
let's
it.
let's talk some Genosha. Go for it.
Yeah, so episode 5, remember it? Yeah, it's Genosha. It's like this like place of like mutants where they can be themselves and interact with like folks that look like them, that act like them, like the safe haven for mutants. Magneto's gonna be like the king and Rogue is gonna be the oh no, wait, she's not gonna be the queen. Um she doesn't want to. But then yeah, like the all is peaceful in the land. Like everybody's like all having a good time, drinking, dancing, playing music, and then like this like big ass sentinel comes out of nowhere and it's so unexpected. Like the trailer does not prepare you for these emotional feelings that you're
Yep.
gonna have in yeah, like a big sentinel comes and just like starts eliminating all these like mutants, and like it's just so like I don't know, like again, like for me, I guess like, being like queer, like just those terms like eliminate, like it's just very powerful, and it resonates with me, and just hearing what's going on today with America and everything, it's just like, dude, like this is like the safe haven for mutants, and here they are. They didn't think they were gonna be attacked, but yet they're being killed, they're being slaughtered, like they have nowhere to hide, and they're just being like wiped out, and it's just super, super sad, and it's crazy. Um, the writer of the show, he explained later on that this is supposed to be a reference to the Orlando shooting and his experiences with because that was a nightclub that he felt uh safe at, and having to relive or kind of healing from that event and what happened at that place, and putting it on paper, making art out of it, I think is very powerful. And it was just an episode that I think will just live on TV animated history.
Yeah, right on. And I agree with all of that for sure. Hard-hitting, powerful episode, and a lot of what we talked about it, it reflected real life stuff. So there's a reason why it it was very jarring and was very powerful, because it felt like, oh shit, this feels real. Um, and of course, and again, we'll give the spoiler alert. Um, the the hard-hitting episode, the hardest hitting part of it was, of course, the death of Gambit, right? So, a lot of mutants were slayed in this episode, but the big whammy was Gambit dying, right? And let's definitely talk about this, because Marvel in general does kill its characters, but they do it in a cop-out way a lot of times, where um the character's not really dead, or they come back not soon after, or it's like a fake out kind of thing. um
Or killed off
but
screen.
yeah, or yeah, killed off screen. Yep. But here, I mean, this is like a real death. You see Gambit's corpse at the end of this episode. And guess what? He doesn't come back later in the season, right? He's dead. He's dead, dead. And his loss is felt. And yeah, it just adds to all the things you mentioned, Porfirio, like the reality of the tragedy here, right? It feels really like something that is real, and in real life, death is forever, right? Death is permanent. And yeah, I like the way they handled it, because at the end they kind of like there's no mistaking it. You know he's gone. Like, and it's creepy too, because like you never see his face. And the fact that you don't see his face, like it almost implies that like his whole face was blown off, or he's horribly disfigured or something. And it just it your imagination kind of fills in the blanks, right? And it becomes like that much more disturbing. And yeah, what do you guys think? This is a big one, the death of Gambit.
Yeah. Oh man, Gambit was always one of my favorites growing up too. So, man, that was really sad to see him go.
Yeah, yeah,
And like, you really don't expect a death like that in episode 5.
yep,
You know, you expect if there's going to be a death in the show, it's going to be like episode 9 or 10. You know, it's really like it's so quick, it's so jarring, it's so sudden, and like this is like Gambit's like one of the main cast too. You know, like he's like a big name X-Men. You're just like, wait, no, he's not gone. No, there's no way. Oh, oh, you know. So
Yeah.
maybe he'll come back. Maybe
hmm,
it's
I
comics, but I know
I think
that was pretty sad.
yeah,
Actually.
yeah. I think what also makes it even more sad is like yeah, like Gambit he like self-sacrificed himself to protect everybody else, you know? But I think what made that scene even more powerful, besides him dying, was Rogue, the last dialogue that she had at the end of the episode, because you know, like her power is like she can't feel him, she can never touch him, because you know, because she absorbs his energy or power. But all you could hear is like Rogue touching him and just saying like, "I can't feel you." You know, it's just like he's gone, you know, like what Henry
yeah,
said, and if it just added to like this like layer of like um grief and the connection that they had, you know, and like that scene was just really powerful. You know, there's like another scene where like, you know, like everybody back at the X Mansion is just watching like the aftermath of the Genosha attack, and everybody's just like in complete silence about like the number of victims, how many people died, and it was just again like just reflective about like how in even in today's society, like that was in 97, like how today's society, how we treat like outsiders and misfits
hmm,
and um you know like I said, this is I feel like very like uh queer of issue, but this is not just queer. I mean like you know you have like gunsmen who killed like um who opened fire at like fucking schools with little kids and
yep,
churches with like um African American folks, and it's just like it's it just goes to show how strong the writing is, how great the voice actors are for being able to deliver their lines, and just how powerful those scenes are. This is not a show for kids. This is a show for adults.
yeah, for sure.
But yeah.
I did like how you mentioned how a lot of the characters found out about the Genosha tragedy through the TV, through TV, right? Because so many of these tragedies you mentioned, that's how people like experience it, right? They're watching the news, you find out about the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, and all these school shootings. It's just like you have this uh experience watching TV and being shocked at the images, right? So again, you're it's this is like a an old school animation style TV series, but it draws so many of these like real life feelings out of you, right? So it's brilliant in that way.
Mhm. Before we move on, I just want to end on a positive note with this storyline is there was the reintroduction of Nightcrawler, who is actually the same voice actor from the OG series, you know,
Nice.
and there's a scene in episode 7 where like Rogue really I feel like doesn't have had time to grieve, and here comes like she's looking for the scientist in charge of the Sentinel project in Mexico, and then here comes Nightcrawler coming to her comfort, and it's Dia de los Muertos celebration. I don't know how familiar you guys are with that event, but it's part of Latinx culture of like seeing death as not like the final stage in life, but kind of like a like celebration of like, okay, they're gonna continue on into this like other thing, so we should celebrate their life instead of grieving over them. And I just thought it was really beautiful that there was like this like other culture celebration to deal with these like feelings, and again, just really great writing on anyone involved with this project.
Cool, cool. Yeah. We've been talking a lot about dark subject matter with this show. It's not all doom and gloom, grim, right? There are some fun moments. So maybe we could talk a little bit about the lighter side of the show. I wanted to call out the Jubilee video game episode, which was definitely one of my favorite parts of this season. Um, so we talked a little bit about the nostalgia of this show. So yeah, there's this great social commentary that kind of elevates it above the original series, and a lot of this show honors the original series, which is great. But it's not just nostalgia for the original X-Men series, it's just 90s nostalgia in general, which is, I think is really cool. There are a lot of fun moments. Like there's a scene where the X-Men go to a rave and Jubilee shoots off her fireworks at the rave, which is really awesome. And then, yeah, there's this video game episode where Jubilee literally becomes a video game character. And the aesthetics of this episode are so cool. Like, basically, it looks exactly like a video game of that era, like Super Nintendo. They really nailed it. Like the look of the animation was so cool. And it was just a lot of fun, you know. Um and like I said, the nostalgia factor was high.
Mhm. Yeah, I also really like that episode. Like, as someone who played the games growing up but didn't really watch it, that was like that. Oh, hey, I know that
There you go.
like episode.
Uh, uh, Apparently, okay, I learned this. There's two things I want to call about that episode. One, um, the Jubilee, she sees like an older Jubilee, and that voice actor of the older Jubilee is actually the OG Jubilee actor from the OG series.
Oh, cool.
Uh-huh.
That's awesome.
There's that, and then believe it or not, I know like like cool graphics and everything, but there's also even some more social commentary on that episode. and apparently it's more about like, kind of like what you guys brought up, like the nostalgia of the 90s. But like if you notice, like during the episode, like Jubilee, she's having a good time. She's celebrating her 18th birthday. But she never really wants to leave. She kind of just wants to stay in this like bubble of like always winning and being her safe zone. And like Roberto's like, oh, we should get back, to kind of reality. This isn't real. And apparently what the writer wanted to do was kind of like address like um the concern that fans were bringing about like the nostalgia and the dangers of carrying that while watching the series, of just being like, this is not like your 90s X-Men series, like this is something else, like don't be stuck in that like danger zone, but also like just grow with it and be able to just accept that this is not going to be the same kind of product that we grew up with. And I thought that was cool.
Good call out. Good call out. All right. So we can certainly continue with the positives, but maybe we can start getting into some of the negatives, if any. I don't know. Seems like we all enjoyed the show. Anything we didn't like so much about this series?
There was no negatives.
Guess it was too short. Yeah.
It was too short. That was the negative. Yeah. We needed 20 episodes for this.
Mhm. I know that's the part that should have been like a '90s show. More because back then TV shows had more episodes.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Hmm.
Well, maybe good segue. The the Jubilee video game episode technically was just half of that episode, right? Is
Hmm.
basically the first half, and the second half dealt with the Storm and Forge stuff, right?
Hmm.
So early in the season, Storm loses her mutant powers. I believe it's episode 2,
Hmm.
and it kind of set up this regaining her powers thing and coming back to sort of save the day at the end, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, maybe it's because it took over the second half of this episode that I left so much for the Jubilee part. But I wasn't a big fan of that particular storyline. Like, I felt like it could have worked if like the return of the powered storm was like this big moment, but I felt like they maybe kind of dropped the ball there. Like they really developed this storyline of like Storm losing her powers, and then she finds Forge and he helps her regain her powers, and it's kind of this like long journey back to form. But there really wasn't a big moment where like I'm back and like Storm just like kicks major ass, right? Um, so I don't know. I felt there was like a lot of screen time for that that storyline, but not a whole lot of payoff. You know what I'm saying? Any thoughts on that?
Hmm. Yeah, it is kind of true. Like, because I like that they kind of slowed things down for her and Forge, and there was a bit of an action scene to kind of cap that off and show her have the powers. But yeah, when she kind of comes back and rejoins the X-Men, it is like much later in the series or in the season, and she doesn't like she fights off the Sentinels, but at like when the jet's getting away. But you're right, she doesn't really have the big payoff, I'm back moment,
Hmm.
Hmm.
or at least not the big one that I think he kind of wanted to really show. Like, yeah, she really is back.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. I agree. Like I think sorry, Henry, I did like that storyline. I thought that was a cool
Okay.
like inner fighting inner demon storyline. But I will agree, like I feel like the comeback could have been a lot better. Like I think it was episode 1 we see like Storm kind of have her own moment where like Cyclops is like, "Okay, Storm, like give it to them," and then like you see like the Sentinels kind of being like scared, and they're like, "Oh, a mega level threat detected,"
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
Storm has like this like cool like solo moment scene where she's just walking through like the sand and like the thunder like turns like glass like on her wherever she steps, you know? And I feel like, she comes back and it's like it's kind of like some members are like, "Were you oh, I didn't even know you were gone," you know? It
yeah,
it it
yeah.
just kind of feels like that. Like, she never has like a big like return moment. She's
Mhm,
just kind of
yeah,
like thrown into like, "I'm back and let's continue where we left off," you know? It
yeah,
was it was kind of like yeah, like what you said, Henry, like what was the point, you know?
yeah. And it maybe speaks to what you guys are talking about a bit, where maybe the season should have been a little longer. Because I felt like when Storm did come back fully powered, there was a lot going on. And like the end of her like comeback arc was just sort of lost in the mix in a way, right? There was just all kinds of stuff happening at the end of the season. So yeah, maybe it could have done well with a bit of spacing out at the end. That said, like, I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to see this season be like 20 episodes or something. But yeah, maybe, maybe a few more would have been good,
Mhm.
perhaps.
Okay, I know I said I didn't have any negatives, but I do have one negative.
Okay.
One episode I did not like was the "Oh, Professor Xavier's actually alive" episode.
Yeah,
Yep.
I was gonna bring that one up too.
When he's marrying Empress Lilandra.
Hmm.
Like I know they had a fling going on in the OG series, you know? And I will admit I don't know how the OG series ends. I don't know how Professor Xavier's journey ends for that series. But like, it's been hinted since even the trailer that he was assassinated, that he died of old age, you know? So to just kind of be like, "Oh, he's actually alive," and he tricked the X-Men into like believing that he died. I was just like, that's pretty manipulative and fucked up, you know? Like you kind of um did like you want to go do your own thing. Okay, I kind of respect that. But then when like shit hits the ceiling, you want to come back and try to fix things. And I was just I don't know, I was kind of like, dude, like kind of make up your mind what you want to do. You want to screw people all over or not? Like like I don't know. I'm just not the biggest Professor X fan, so maybe that's why I was a little bit more cynical, but
Mm.
I didn't like that episode.
Yeah, I'm with you. That was definitely my least favorite episode as well. I was definitely like, there was parts where I was like kind of super confused because you think like, oh, well, he's assassinated. He should have died on Earth, but he's on a different planet. Uh, I'm not really sure what's going on here, and I think I knew there was a lot of context I was missing from the original series with that, but it kind of happened so fast that you're just like, wait, what? At at times. And I also think like the X-Men without Professor X, I thought was like it felt like a new and interesting concept for the X-Men
Hmm.
and not really something you've seen in the movies. Like, it's tap into the comics, but like in most shows, like he's like one of the centerpieces of the X-Men. And then you got to see what does the X-Men look like with Magneto as the head. You get to see Cyclops wants to be the head as well. And I thought that was such like that was a cool concept to kind of drive the show that they kind of bring a bit to a halt with that episode, you know? Oh well, Professor X is alive. That means he's gonna come back eventually and become the head of the X-Men once again. So I think that's another reason I just didn't really care for that one.
Hmm. you know, or did you want to add something, Henry?
No, go ahead for you.
Okay, I have another big negative. I feel like you guys are gonna hate me for it. I feel like this is gonna be an unpopular opinion, but um, do you have any final thoughts, Henry, before I get into my negative?
No, I'm
Or
ready to move on to the next one. Go ahead.
okay, this is my big negative, and it might be an unpopular opinion, but I honestly did not like all the Avengers cameos.
Ooh, let's talk
Oh, in the
about it.
last episode.
The last episode, and even like the Captain America standoff against Rogue.
Hmm.
Mm.
Like again, like I think like X-Men is a big property where the X-Men can stand alongside themselves, that they don't need like an appearance from like an Avengers member to help make elevate it or make it relevant or better or whatever. Like I'm cool with the Spider-Man cameo just because it's already happened with the 90s. You know, there was already crossovers between the two um TV shows, but then like adding all the cameos with like Cap America, Iron Man, Cloak and Dagger, Daredevil. I'll admit that's cool, but did not like it at the same time because I just felt like Marvel just kind of felt like I think Marvel felt like they needed to add those to kind of give the X-Men like some kind of like oomph, like more elevate them more than to give more popularity in some kind of way. And I just felt like it was not needed and definitely unnecessary in this X-Men TV show.
Yeah, actually, I'll agree with you. I think in the last episode in particular, they cut back to the cameos, I think a few too many times. Like they gotta show Daredevil, they gotta show Spider-Man, they gotta show Cap, they gotta show Iron Man, and then they kind of cut back to them a couple more times.
Hmm.
And like the X-Men is such a wide cast of characters that um, like you're also thinking like, man, where was like Colossus, Kitty Pride, like Juggernaut, like
Yeah,
you have all these great characters that they just didn't show at all. Yet they had like the Avengers there.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, like they showed Omega Red, Polarized, Cyclock, like but it's like, there's so many other um X-Men characters that could have been shown, like you said, Colossus, Kitty, uh I think they showed Iceman. I don't remember if they
Mhm.
showed
I don't
Iceman or
know.
not.
Like the Juggernaut was there as like I think Morph is a good way to kind of throw in a cameo because that's
Yeah.
just his powers.
Hmm.
So like, oh hey, there's the Hulk, but not really the Hulk. That's just
Yeah.
Morph, and that's what he does. Same
Yeah.
with he's also the Juggernaut at one point.
Yeah.
But you're also kind of wondering like where are these characters, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Especially if you want to introduce like the X-Men to a new audience, it's like this is the perfect way to do it. Like you could show them like all these cool other X-Men characters from like the OG series, and instead, like I guess, like here we are with characters we're already familiar with. It's a cool like, oh, that's awesome. But for me, it just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah. Captain America also. I watched yeah, I didn't watch X-Men, but I did watch Spider-Man. And there's an entire arc with Captain America that ends with him being trapped in like a time loop or trapped back in time fighting the Red Skull for all eternity. And that's kind of where he was left in Spider-Man. So that was also a thing where I'm like, wait, how's Captain America there?
Yeah.
How'd he come back? I thought they like that and like the whole thing was destroyed, like he was gone too. So you kind of wonder like, wait a minute, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm mostly with you guys on this also. I get it. With cameos are generally cool because they're brief, right? And they don't interrupt the narrative. They don't mess with the storyline. It's just kind of this fun little nugget, right? Where you get in trouble is with cameos that make you think like, "Oh, wait a minute. Like here, Iron Man makes a couple cameos in this series, but once you have shown Iron Man here, you have to question, well, if Iron Man is in this universe, suited up, he's in his armor, Tony Stark is here, right? Why didn't Iron Man do anything to help with the events at the end of this season, right? Like, I get it. There are some cameos from street level heroes like Daredevil, Spider-Man, Cloak and Dagger. I mean, they're not going to be able to help out a whole lot against a giant meteor crash landing onto Earth. But Iron Man is the guy to deal with this sort of thing, right? Doctor Strange makes a cameo. He could certainly help out with something like that. So the moment you have an Iron Man cameo and a Doctor Strange cameo, boom, all of a sudden they're in your universe and you have to deal with that, right? So I was pretty annoyed that they showed them, but they ended up doing nothing, right? That's a problem. To me, that's a plot hole. So that kind of turned me off. So it's tough with this stuff. Like it reminded me a bit of some of the conversations that the Russo brothers had with Infinity War and Endgame. Like they had this huge like whiteboard of characters, right? And they had to like manage it, like who's gonna get in the movie, who's gonna be a cameo, who's gonna have like a main storyline, and it was just this like monumental task, right? I could see something like that for this show, right? Okay, well, who's gonna get a cameo? Who's gonna get a good storyline, etc. Mutants, Avengers, other Marvel characters, etc. Right? It's not easy. Um, so I think they dropped the ball on a couple of these. Like, yeah, look, I feel like they should have left Iron Man out of this. Like, don't even like introduce the idea of Iron Man because, it just kind of messes with the story. On the flip side, you guys mentioned the morph stuff. The morph stuff is perfect because Morph is using his powers
Hmm.
and you're getting a cool like Easter egg. You're not really seeing the real Juggernaut or I think he's like Psylocke at one point. But
Hmm.
it's super fun, right? You're getting a fun cameo. It's like, oh shit, yeah. And like that's part of his powers. That is his power set. He can morph into other superheroes or supervillains. So that's cool. That's cool. That totally works. Um, what else? Oh, you mentioned Where's Kitty Pride? There is a Kitty Pride Easter egg at the end. Like there's a poster kind of
Oh yeah.
similar
Oh
Hmm.
yeah.
to like a classic
Uh-huh.
X-Men comic
Hmm.
where you see all these faces and it says Shadow Cat. So she's there. And so is the Scarlet Witch,
I said
by
yeah.
the way, right? That was
Hmm.
cool. So many cameos. Like I'll list off a few here. I know I'm missing a ton, but Captain America is in there. I could actually Cap is more than a cameo. He's like a supporting character in this season. But Iron Man, Silver Samurai has a cameo. Spider-Man and Mary Jane have cameos. Omega Red, like you're saying, Porfirio, Daredevil, Cloak and Dagger, Doctor Strange, um, Apocalypse has a cameo. Um, yeah, maybe we can segue to that a bit. So at the very end of the season, um, we kind of get the implication that the next season is going to be centered around Apocalypse, perhaps. Yeah. What do you
Hmm.
guys think?
Yeah. They could do Age of Apocalypse.
Mhm.
Um,
Hmm.
who do you guys would think would be his like four horsemen?
Mm. I
I
mean,
think
in the OG series, I know Mystique really helped him, and so did oh, what's his name? Angel. Angel was a
Oh,
horseman,
right. The
but
Archangel, right?
yeah, but he later fought against Apocalypse. Um, but yeah, I don't know who
Like,
his four
I
horsemen
guess it
would
could be
be.
any. I guess it could be anyone.
Yeah,
I don't know if they'd because let's see. In the movie, it was Storm, Angel, Psylocke, and Magneto.
yeah.
But of course, we know Magneto is in another time. So I wonder if they could do. I saw someone once said it could be Wolverine. Now that Wolverine had the adamantium ripped out of him, he's going to go with that 90s feral Wolverine kind of look. So he could become one of the four horsemen.
I don't
Uh,
think so. I think Wolverine's too stubborn. He barely follows Cyclops' leadership.
yeah, now that he's become because like I think it like completely changes. Like, well, I guess we'll see what they do with him.
Hmm.
They could do that. They could add it a way to bring back four villains that we haven't seen yet. Like we
Hmm.
talked about. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
where's the Juggernaut? Where's Sabretooth? Where's we haven't seen Mystique yet.
Mm,
So it could be
Yeah.
just almost like this Sinister Six type situation.
yeah.
I was thinking the same thing. I don't know a whole lot about the Four Horsemen, but from my little research I just did now, it's like kind of a rotating group, a la the Sinister Six, right? As long as you have that number, you're good. But who
Hmm.
is actually in there is like it's always changing. So we shall see. But it definitely seems like that's where season two is headed, right?
Hmm.
Apocalypse and yeah, possibly the Four Horsemen. Yeah, any other random thoughts? We're kind of just getting into random thoughts
Hmm.
um,
territory here.
okay, I want to ask like the basic, okay, question. Yeah, I have like a basic question. Whose side would you guys be on? Like Professor Xavier or Magneto? Like, I'm just gonna give my own 2 cents first. I think like, Magneto's right that the mutants and humans can't coexist because humans just can't uh accept mutants for who they are. It's very evident, and even when they try to, I feel like when humans try to accept mutants, I see it as this very like white liberal standpoint of like, oh, I support like the Black Lives Matter, and I voted for Obama.
Hmm.
Like I just very see it as like very minimal, but when it comes down to like the action, they're like afraid, of like those group of people when they're being confronted by them. They're not down for like the cause. So that's just my extreme take, and that's why I agree with Magneto. But what about you two?
Christian thoughts?
I guess that's always the debate because Magneto always makes good points, but his actions are always questionable,
Very extreme.
are always like too extreme. You always
Yeah.
see where he's coming from, and you kind of see where he's come from, and you know, being a child of the Holocaust puts like a very real world kind of spin to him, where you can really kind of relate to. Oh yeah, this guy's really. He's seen the darkest parts of humanity, and that kind of that's a big part of his origin. But of course, at the end, he pretty much like he he does something that's like kind of like that could pretty much destroy the entire planet. Like while you might agree, and like maybe Professor X, he's also, as we see in this show, very kind of selfish, and
Problematic.
he's very much an idealist without
Hmm.
knowing how to achieve that ideal. Um, but maybe the ideal could be worth fighting for of Professor X. Maybe I'll take him because he believes that the ends don't always justify the means. whereas you could say Magneto is the opposite, you know?
Mhm. Henry?
Yeah, this is a good question. So, like, I feel like idealistically, I would want to side with Professor X, you know? I mean, that's what we want, right? We want to coexist peacefully, right? But we live in the real world, and realistically, Magneto is right. Yeah. And particularly in the context of this show, because I was thinking about what happened in the finale. It's very telling because um, there's a moment where um, humans are considering, I guess they're calling it the Magneto protocols.
Mhm.
And it's basically like sending a weapon of mass destruction to wipe out the X-Men, right? And like literally Captain America is there and he just lets it happen, right? He's completely complicit in this decision, right? So think about that a bit. Captain America is like he's supposed to be the best of us, right? He's he's the best in humanity, the best human in a way, right? And even he is like, let's kill the mutants, right? So from that perspective, it's like, well, of course Magneto has to do what he does, right? He has no choice. He's been through it. He's been through the Holocaust. He's been through the lies of the humans and saying one thing and doing another, right? So, um, yeah, like in the context of the show, I 100% side with Magneto. Um, on a broader level, like in real life, it's hard to say, like it goes back a bit to the origins of the characters of Professor X and Magneto, right? Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's creations. There were influences from Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and the
Mhm.
same questions come up all the time. Who is right? Whose viewpoints do you side with more? And it's a pretty complicated question, of course. And like, yeah, I think what I'm gonna settle on is like idealistically, Professor X is what we want. His viewpoints and his thoughts on tolerance and everything. But realistically, it's more. But Magneto has a more compelling argument, I think.
Mhm. You know, like we talk about like whether or not this show is like for adults or for kids. Like this show really does have like its um I guess like dark scenes that you didn't see coming. Like one scene that really caught my attention was I think in episode 7 when the X-Men are trying to find Trask and
Oh
capture
yeah.
him,
Mm-hmm.
and Rogue, she like grabs him by the neck and just drops him.
Right.
And everybody's like, that's not what we're about, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it goes into like that whole like Professor X, Magneto kind of philosophy, or even like if you look at even like other um comic book archetypes like Batman, Daredevil, like when do you cross that line, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like one that was dark, but two, I was just like, damn, I did not expect that,
Yeah.
from Rogue. She had a
Yeah.
lot of anger built up, and it was a crazy moment.
Yeah.
Mhm. Another great moment is, that I think kinda, harkens back to it's earlier in the season.
Mhm.
It's when Cyclops is doing that interview, you know,
Mm,
on live TV, and he kinda
mhm,
breaks down and like he kind of says some like pretty real shit, he
Mhm,
kind of says
mhm,
like, we've been saving you, we've been
mhm,
saving the world, and this is kind of what we get. We're still kind of treated this way, and we
mhm.
still have to talk this way. And then like he kind of just mics drops and walks away. I think that actually is that's the Genosha episode, I think, at the very beginning.
I believe so, yeah. Yeah, he dropped some truth right there, you know?
Yeah, and you can kind of see the frustration that where you could see he kind of wants to go to Magneto's side,
Yeah.
but he grew up under Professor X,
Yeah,
you know?
like, yeah, like, I remember, yeah, like, what kinda led up to that was also, like, I think it was episode 2 when he's in the hospital with, Madison Gray, as Jean Grey, where, like, the doctor's like, "Oh, I'm not gonna treat your kind," you know? Like, and Rogue had to, like, come and absorb his powers, and, it's that, like, frustration that Cyclops, like, had built about, like, the Doctor being very, hateful against their kind, and then, like, what you said, Christian, like, we're always saving all you guys's, but you guys don't care, you're very ungrateful, and it's just a lot of build up, you know?
Hey, I'm glad you mentioned that episode 7 where Rogue essentially attempts murder. Very hard hitting. Um, yeah, I think it was a really cool character moment because it was shocking, but understandable, right? We've seen what Rogue has gone through at this up to this point, right? Like the death of Gambit really hit her hard, and you understand why she might do something like this, right? So it makes sense narratively, and it's one of those things that's like, whoa, like here's a great hero who's basically like trying to kill a person, and it's hard to watch, and it's just impactful. Um, One thing I did have a problem with though, like Nightcrawler is in that scene, right?
Mhm.
So Nightcrawler could have easily like teleported to save this guy, right? Bolivar Trask is the guy that Rogue drops off the building. It turns out he doesn't die because he's one of
He's a
these.
robot.
Yeah, he's like an android, like he's
Yeah.
part Sentinel, right? Um, but he was seemingly going to die. Why didn't Nightcrawler just like teleport himself there and then grab him and teleport the both of them away and save them? Bit of a plot hole, I think. But
Maybe
yeah, you know.
Nightcrawler agreed with her.
Ooh,
Deep down, he
hey,
Yeah, he was
agreed.
there
watch
too,
out.
so maybe
Uh-oh.
he's like, fuck this guy.
Yeah.
You can tell Wolverine felt that way too.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, maybe you tapped into something there, Christian. But yeah, that one it just was a little bit eyebrow raising. Like, hey, like someone could have saved this guy, particularly Nightcrawler, I thought. Anyhow, what else? Like yeah, the season was kind of chock full with sort of jaw-dropping moments. I think the moment that Magneto tears the adamantium out of Wolverine was pretty
Ooh,
shocking,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah, that was like the very end of an episode. Yeah, so it was kind of unclear if Wolverine was alive or not. I think those of us that know the character know that like he's got the healing factor and probably would survive even something as brutal as that, but nonetheless pretty
Yeah,
shocking. Any thoughts on that moment?
yeah. It's cool they adapted it. I think that is like one of the like kind of iconic pages of X-Men is Magneto ripping the adamantium from Wolverine, also from the 90s.
There you go.
So
Mhm.
that I I was like, oh shit, they're actually doing it.
I I low key thought they were gonna do it, but I think like, like I feel like that was a little plot hole. I was just thinking like, okay, y'all know Wolverine's skeleton is made out of metal, but you chose Wolverine to join you guys on the Magneto mission instead of the other mission.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, yeah. Good call.
like I kind of thought about it. I was like, okay, wait, this might happen, this might not, but we'll see what we'll see. And yeah, yeah.
It did. Yeah.
Um, what were your guys' thoughts? You know that one scene where again, Professor Xavier's like trying to uh state his claim about like humans and mutants coexisting and trying to challenge Magneto and his beliefs and everything, and then Magneto just like uses his powers to close his mouth, and then he's like, "I've always wanted to say this, Charles. Shut up." What were you guys? Because I was just like, finally somebody does it, you know? I feel like, you know, Charles is one to blame for a lot of more mutant deaths than Magneto. So I was just like, yes, finally somebody tells him to do it.
Yeah, I like that because uh the beauty to the Professor X and Magneto relationship is that they're like brothers, but they don't get along. Like, you go back to the movies with um Patrick Stewart and oh, what was the Magneto actor's name?
Oh, Michael Fat. Oh wait, no, that was Ian McKellen.
Ian
Or
McKellen, yeah. But yeah, also the James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender portrayals as well. There is an animosity there, right? And it's great that they're like fighting for a similar cause, but from completely different standpoints. And yeah, there's beef, and that moment really reflected that. So it's true to the characters for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, that was a really cool moment, and he actually puts the helmet on Professor X so he can't communicate with him.
Hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, okay, another, I guess, like standout moment. I don't know if you guys caught it or not from the finale was when, you know, we just talked about Wolverine's skeleton being like taken out and he's like on the bed, kind of like recovering everything. And I forgot, I think it was Cyclops who was like, "Oh, like fight for her, like fight." He's referencing Jean, fight for Jean, and then
Hmm. Yeah.
later on in the episode he like calls out her name, and then there's this moment where Morph he changes into Jean and then says like, "Oh, I love you,"
Yeah.
like what were your guys' thoughts on that? Like, I know the writer he addressed it, I think this morning, since the episode was just came out yesterday.
Hmm.
But like, what did you guys think? Like, you think like that was like a more romantic or platonic kind of message?
It's funny the X-Men fandom panel we went to at WonderCon this year. There was a question in this vein where someone asked, "Oh, what's up with Wolverine and Morph?" Right? And the producer on the panel was basically like, well, I can't say too much, but they have a special unique relationship. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
just leave it at that, right? Almost teasing this moment you just mentioned, right, Porfirio?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but this moment, I would add, yes, he says, I love you, but he says it in a way that's interesting. He said, um, she would never say this, so I'll say it. I love you,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's almost like really explicitly saying, like, I, Morph, love you, Wolverine, right? So that sounds like it's pretty explicit, like feelings, like real feelings, feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. That's my takeaway, because if he said, okay, he morphs into Jean Grey. If he
Hmm.
just said, "I love you," you could take it as, oh, he's just saying that because he wants to comfort him
Yeah.
with this appearance of the woman that Logan loves, right? But he explicitly says she won't say this, so I'll say it. So he's
Hmm.
saying, I more love you, Wolverine, right? It's very like direct. So yeah, no, I read it as a pretty big moment, and definitely has romantic undertones to it.
Okay. What were you, Christian?
Yeah. I guess another moment actually from the panel, that was kind of reminded of like, well, the producer was like kind of hush hush. They had the voice actor for Morph there.
Hmm.
Um, it's a JP Carliak.
Yeah.
Um, and he said, something you don't see a lot in media, and something that he thought like he really wanted to kind of push was that, you know, you could have, a straight guy and a gay guy be best friends, be really, really good friends. And he was like really all for that. The crowd cheered. Um, and that they could just be, platonic friends, like really close friends, and that, you know, it may not be truly romantic feelings. He could say I love you as like, you're my homie,
Hmm.
type of deal, like I'll always be there. I'll always be there for you. Maybe not in a romantic way, but as a friend way. And maybe that Gene, coming out as Gene was like, I know you've always wanted to hear this. I know, Gene would never say it. I know you love Gene. Um, and like it was almost like a bit of a cathartic moment, or like something that he knew would kind of get through to him because he knows him as, because Worf knows Wolverine, you know, and so it's a very vague and open-ended thing that it could be taken in many different ways, I think, and that's kind of why it's such a striking moment.
Hmm.
Is it romantic? Is it platonic? Or is it just an Easter egg,
Yeah.
An Easter egg. So I'm not 100% sure how I'd personally read it
Uh-huh.
based on, I think, like what we kind of saw at the panel, and based on like kind of, I think, how we may have interpreted it and how we interpreted the show. But, it
Hmm.
was kind of like one of the whoa moments of
Yeah.
it as well, even though it was so quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do think it's purposefully sort of open-ended. You
hmm
could interpret it in a number of ways, and they'd all be right,
I guess we'll see what happens in season
Yeah.
2.
Do you want
Yes.
do you want to know what the writer said when he addressed it this morning?
Sure.
Sure.
So labeled it as straight up like it's a romantic um
Yeah.
writing.
Ah,
Oh, so
Uh,
it is Roman.
uh, but I think like both of you bring up good points. I think like I know like art and these scenes like we all have like like creators have like some intentions with writing or how they deliver scenes. But I think like it's really beautiful, like how both of you had your own interpretation or how it could be open to interpretation of certain ways. And I think like this is one of the good examples of like, sure, the writer says it's romantic, but I think it could be like, however, like the viewer or the fan takes it, it could go either way.
yeah. Yeah, it's a cool moment. It's similar to that moment we mentioned earlier where Rogue is witnessing the death of Gambit, where she's holding him in her arms and she's like, I can't feel you. Because that showcases her powers, right? If you
Mm-hmm.
know Rogue, she can always feel you. Um, and here is Morph using his powers to morph into the woman Logan loves. So it's just cool, It's like it's it's good writing, and, a lot of the show has good writing like this.
Mhm.
Alright, any final thoughts before we get into our ratings?
I
Let's Oh, yeah, go for it.
I guess like one thing I do want to bring up, I guess Henry, I want to hear your take on this since you're going to be cosplaying this character very soon at San Diego Comic Con, as Morph. But I don't know if you guys remember or not, but prior to I think even the show coming out, the character Morph um received some backlash for identifying as non-binary and throughout the show, they Morph only uses he pronouns, and I was reading up on that, like, oh, Morph is non-binary, but he uses he pronouns instead of like neutral they pronouns. And again, like, it was said by the voice actor, like, you just have to like think back, like, this is a show that um was created for a 1997 setting where that kind of language didn't exist back then, like they pronouns and all that kind of stuff, non-binary. Um, so where was I going with this? Like, so that's not used, but there was a lot of backlash when it was mentioned that Morph was non-binary, because then you have all these like fans saying like, "Oh, get that woke stuff out of X-Men. That doesn't belong." And I just feel like that's very contradicting to what X-Men stands for, you know? Um, yeah, I don't know. What's your thoughts on that, Henry?
Well, yeah, the first part of it, that explanation of the time period seems completely legitimate, right? Like, that sort of language didn't really exist back then, so in a series that takes place in 1997 would not and should not have that, right? And it doesn't mean it is at odds with the Morph character being non-binary, like LGBTQ characters weren't really in media way back when. It doesn't mean that like gay people didn't exist in the 60s, right?
Hmm.
So that explanation makes total sense. And then the whole thing about like, oh great, the X-Men have become woke. Here we go again. I mean, just more nonsense. I mean, particularly with the X-Men, right? Like the X-Men have been embraced by all these groups that you mentioned, Porfirio, for ages, right? Marginalized communities, minorities, LGBTQ communities. Like the X-Men is part of all that before this show, right? So to say like, oh, whoa, what the hell? That how did the X-Men all get all woke all of a sudden, right? Like the X-Men have been woke, right? So it's just stupid. Um, yeah, it's barely even worth like addressing, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, the X-Men and politics have always kind of been like, hand in hand, you know?
Yeah.
And I think you can kind of see with just the ideological battle between Professor X and Magneto and kind of where they've been coming from.
Right?
I think
Yeah.
as such a core part of the story that it like this it feels like this is just this is how X-Men has always been, you know? And I think like, oh yeah, X-Men and politics, they go together pretty well and the X-Men is I think that's kind of what makes it so great is that it always has, something to say.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like 100, like what you said, Christian, like, we've said throughout this episode, like this show was made, a continuation of the 90s show, but it has themes and stories that are relevant, that were relevant back then and are still being talked about and relevant today. And even beyond the TV shows, like the comics, X-Men has just always been that political um comparison for like misfits and marginalized groups. So it's like when it's like when folks who say like, "Oh, X-Men's too woke," it's like, do you even get X-Men? Are we watching the same thing? Like, are we? This is not Fox X-Men, you know? Like,
Yeah, it reminds me of like music fans being like, "Oh, I liked Rage Against the Machine so much more before they got woke." It's like, "Oh, come on." Completely missing the boat. All right, let's get into our ratings. On a scale of 1 to 5, what would you give season 1 of X-Men 97? Who wants to start?
I'll start. All
All right.
right. So I think X-Men really is a show that always, while we have our some episodes we didn't really care for, some plot lines we didn't care for. I felt generally this show felt like it was firing on all cylinders for the most part. Like the whole 10 episodes. Animation was pretty stellar. Fight choreography was really great. Uh Soundtrack, it was cool with the opening scene. It was great seeing the old costumes again. Like this really feels like it was the whole package. And I think this is like one of the best things on Disney Plus. I think this is really one of the reasons to get Disney Plus
Mhm.
is this one up there, with I'd say like Mandalorian and Andor as like the best things in Disney on the platform. And I think this is really like I think one of the big superhero highlights of the year. So I'll give it the full 5 out of 5. I think this is a pretty spectacular show. It was great to see to kind of be there for the hype surrounding it, and like I think I'm really excited for season 2.
Right on. I can go next. Yeah, I really enjoyed this show immensely. So much to get out of this show. And it is cool that it's more than just entertainment, right? Certainly entertaining. It's got the nostalgia factor. It's got the fandom factor. I love it when shows and movies really care about the fan audience, and it's abundantly clear that this show wants to make the fans happy, and it does. It delivers. It delivers that, and so much more. What else? It's hard hitting. It doesn't pull punches, um, like so much. So many of the shocking moments of the show, are unexpected. Like it's an homage of 90s animation, but there's so much of it that you would never see in 90s animation, right? You wouldn't see the level of violence, um, the killing of characters like this season. So I like that. I like how it's hard hitting. Um, so, I had some minor gripes, some nitpicky plot holes, and a few parts of the season that I thought went a little slow. Um, I don't think those would warrant like taking it down a notch, but I think honestly, if I were if I grew up on the original series, I think I would go 5 out of 5, but, since I didn't, I think I'd go with a 4, so I'll go with a 4 out of 5. How about you, Porfirio?
For me, I give it 1 out of 5. I'm just kidding. Um, no,
-5.
no, this show was everything I could have asked for and more. Like I said, like I grew up on the show. It was the show that got me into the geek fandom that I'm so into and the person I've become today, like it introduced me into like comic books and geek culture and fandoms and everything, but definitely like influenced me about who I am as a person, being like okay to be known that like it's okay to be a misfit, to not find not it's okay to not belong into societal norms and just finding your own group of people, your own chosen family, whether it's your geek family or your queer family or whatever your niche is. I think X-Men taught me that growing up, and this show is very reflective of those beliefs and themes. Um, I think like this show is one of the best things on Disney Plus, and it just has like this like very alive cultural phenomenon that I haven't seen so much with other Disney Plus shows. We have like viewing parties, drag shows, Comic-Con panels surrounding this that have like been kind of like 30 years in the making. And so I think it's a really good time for if you grew up with the show. I think it's just fucking awesome. So easily 5 out of 5 for me.
Awesome. Okay, there you have it, our ratings. And now, like we often do, comics recommendation time. So, we talked about getting into X-Men animation lately, been into X-Men movies. But X-Men comics is a bit of a blind spot for the three of us. We've read some, but not a lot. So maybe that's like the next assignment for us. Yeah. Um, for now, though, Porfirio and I did read the Avengers versus X-Men crossover event series. So let's talk about that a bit. So this was a 2012 release written by Brian Michael Bendis, illustrated by John Romita Jr. And I thought it was pretty cool. It featured a lot of characters. So, when you're talking about the X-Men and the Avengers, you're talking about a huge roster of superheroes. Potentially, we talked about Four Horsemen and Sinister Six. Like there's like a rotating roster for each of those groups. But we saw a lot of different Avengers and X-Men in this comic series. And it's good we brought this up too, because there is like a little bit of AVX DNA in X-Men 97, right? So we were talking a little bit about this off mic prior to recording, but probably won't happen. However, AVX is like a potential future of Marvel animation, right? So this series, X-Men 97, has been very popular. It will lead to a season 2 and very likely lead to a lot of other animated projects. And we could see some Avengers animation in the near future and perhaps cultivating into an AVX event series. Yeah. So we got some seeds of that here, possibly opening the door to something like that, where there's some differing opinions between Captain America and the mutants here, right? So that's exactly what happens in AVX, right? Avengers and X-Men both have good intentions, but they have vastly different perspectives, and it all comes to a head, and they battle. You know, Captain America leads the Avengers, and Cyclops leads the X-Men in this series, and it's pretty compelling. Like, and it kind of goes down like you think it would go down, like power wise. You got to give the Avengers the edge. They're Earth's mightiest heroes.
Hmm.
Um, but what's the X factor? What's the secret weapon, right? It's Phoenix, right? So Phoenix really levels the playing field in this series, and it's just like that schoolyard argument, like who would win in a fight, and the easy answer is, oh, of course the Avengers would beat the X-Men, but then the argument is, wait a minute, the X-Men have Phoenix, right? So how are you gonna top that?
Mhm.
So the series addresses all of that, which is cool. And in X-Men 97, we do see Phoenix, and it is a moment where we're like, whoa, you can't fuck with Phoenix. Like you cannot defeat Phoenix. She's like all powerful, right? So yeah, a lot of there's a lot of, like I said, DNA of AVX in this series, and I definitely recommend it. Anything to add about AVX, Porfirio?
Um, no, just yeah, check it out, read it, and if I remember correctly, because it's been a while since I read that series, um, we talked about in the podcast how the popularity of Wolverine. He fights on the side of the Avengers, not X-Men.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. And that's cool too because that's Wolverine. Like he technically is a mutant and an X-Man, but like he's that guy, he's a loner, right? And he'll just do whatever the fuck he wants to do, right? So it makes sense. He'd pull something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. There you have it. With that, we can wrap up the episode. This is Farewell from Henry, Christian, and Porfirio.